Wysteria, energy, twister.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the last episode of the Legends of Britany. We're on Saint Ronan, but this will be the last episode, guys, and we'll be able to move on to something else. Of Saint Ronan, there is told a tale of solemn warning to wives addicted to neglecting their children and seeking their pleasure elsewhere. As it is succinctly expressed, Saint Ronan was an Irish bishop who came to Lyon, where he retired into a hermitage in the forest of Neve. Grallo, the king of Britanny, was in the habit of visiting him in his cell, listening to his discourses and putting theological questions to him. The domestic question must have been a problem even in those days, since we find Grallo's queen, Cuban, in charge of her 5-year-old daughter. Family cares proving rather irksome, Cuban solved the difficulty of her daughter by putting the child into a box with bread and milk to keep her quiet, while she amused herself with frivolous matters. Unfortunately, this ingeniously improvised creche proved singularly unsuccessful, for the poor little girl choked on a piece of crust, and when the queen next visited the child, she found to her horror that she was dead. Terrified at the fatal result of her neglect, and not daring to confess what had happened, the queen, being a woman of resource, closed the box and raised a hue and cried to find the girl, who she declared must have strayed. She rushed in search of her husband to Saint Ronan's cell, and upbraided the hermit for being the cause of the king's absence. But for you, she declared, my daughter would not have been lost. But it was a fatal mistake to accuse the saint, or to imagine that he could be deceived. Sternly rebuking her, he challenged her with the fact that the child lay dead in a box, with milk and bread beside her. Rising, he left his cell, and, followed by the agitated royal couple, he led the way to where the proof of the queen's neglect and deceit was found. Small mercy was shown in those days to erring womanhood, and the guilty queen was instantly stoned with stones until she died. The saint completed his share in the matter by casting himself on his knees beside the child, whereupon she was restored to life. Wow. Saint Goezenu. Saint Goezenu, which is Circe, AD 675. Sir, AD 675, was a native of Britain whose parents crossed to Brittany and settled near Brest, where the saint built an oratory and cabin for himself. The legend runs that the prince of the neighbourhood, having offered to give him much land, as he could surround with a ditch in one day, the saint took a fork and dragged it along the ground after him as he walked, in this way enclosing 1.5 leagues of land. The fork as it trailed behind him, making a furrow and throwing up the embankment on a small scale. This story is quite probably a popular tradition which grew up to explain the origin of old military earthworks in that part of the country, which were afterward utilised by the monks of Saint Gozenu. It is also related of this worthy saint that he had such a horror of women that he set up a huge menhir to mark the boundary beyond which no female was to pass under penalty of death. On one occasion, a woman, either to test the extent of the saint's power, or from motives of enmity, pushed another woman who was with her past this landmark, but the innocent trespasser was unhurt, and her assailant fell dead. On one occasion, we are told, Gozenu asked a farmer's wife for some cream cheese, But the woman, not wishing to part with them, declared that she had none. "You speak the truth," said the saint. "You had some, but if you will now look in your cupboard, you will find that they have been turned into stone." And when the ungenerous housewife ran to her cupboard, she found this was so. The petrified cheeses were long preserved in the church of Goizenu, being removed during the Revolution and after preserved in the manner of Kerigivas. Goizenu governed his church for 24 years, till he met with a violent death, accompanied by his brother Saint Magan. He went to Gwynplaine to see the monastery which Saint Corbasius was building there, but he began to praise the architecture of his own church, and this so enraged the master's builder that he dropped his hammer on the critic's head. To add to grief of Saint Magan, Saint Corbasius endeavoured to appropriate the body of the murdered saint. He consented, however, to allow Saint Magan to have such bones as he was able to identify as belonging to his brother, whereupon Saint Magan prayed all night, and the next morning spread a white sheet for the bones, which miraculously arranged themselves into an entire skeleton, which the sorrowing Magan was thus enabled to remove. The end. And that is the end of the Legends of Britany, my dear friends. Thank you for joining in to these tales. We could go on to different holy wells and the Venus of Quimperley, feeding the dead, but I think we've really done enough now with the Legends of Britany. Of course, they will be available on my podcast, more readings. If you are interested in learning more about the Legends of Britany, then head over there, where we'll be looking at various costumes, customs, let's say, and costumes, I guess, throughout Britanny and its ages. Thank you for listening to this last episode on YouTube, but not the last episode over in the podcast. And you can find my podcast on Google Podcasts and on Spotify. I'm not sure if they're on Apple yet. I've never checked. I don't use Apple devices. But essentially, they should be on most pod streaming networks by now. And it's just the same as YouTube, Wysteria Energy Twister. So if you want to learn more about the Legends of Britany, as in their costumes and their customs, then feel free to head over there and you can continue listening to more. And if you're on the podcast listening to this, then you know you're going to have the option to hear much more. Thank you.
Wysteria. Energy. Twister.